Ladies and gentlemen, this is Ghost. Welcome back to another video. So you might have seen the first video that we posted a few days ago about simple tips to improve performance and increase your KD in Battlefield 6. If you haven't seen it, the link in the description for you. Today we're going to take things a step further and talk about 10 pro tips and more advanced planning to improve your gameplay and of course your KD. Without further ado, let's get started. Tip number one is the minimap. The first thing I want to talk about is the minimap actually, because the minimap is a huge part of the game and I think a lot of people seriously underuse it. The first thing you need to do is to make sure your minimap settings are set correctly. You can do that by going into your settings, then HUD, then minimap. For minimap size, I would go with large. For background opacity, I would set it to 80. Cone opacity 15. Cone edge opacity would be 40. Rotation, I would keep that on. And interior zoom, I personally keep it off. Viewing distance is extremely important here. You want to choose the highest number possible, which is 300 across the board. The bigger the viewing distance between you and structures, players, vehicles, or anything else on the map, the more enemy pings and spawns you're going to see. So basically for view distance on foot, definitely set it to 300. Same thing for ground vehicles and same thing for air vehicles. But the most important one, especially for the sake of this video, is the view distance on foot. If this is set to something like 150, you're absolutely going to miss enemies that they get pinged or light up on the map. Keeping it at 300 gives you way more information at all times. The minimap helps you decide which side of an objective you should approach. For example, if you're like, going into taking an objective and your teammates are already engaging enemies from the front, those enemies will almost always light up on the minimap when they start shooting. The closer you get to an objective, the more clearly you can see where enemies are firing from, which immediately gives you an advantage for a flank. The minimap also shows you where your teammates are shooting, and that's a huge. If your teammates are firing in a certain direction, that almost always means that there are enemies right in front of them, right? It also shows you where enemies are clustered together, which is important because sometimes that's an overpowered situation that you might not want to push directly. But overall, the minimap gives you a clear sense of where the fight is flowing, the direction of the engagement is moving, and where the pressure points are. All of this awareness typically tells you exactly where to hit the enemy instead of running in blind and dying for no reason. Tip number two is enemy follow-ups. After you get a kill, you should always assume that someone is coming in right after the enemy you just killed. Usually within about 2 seconds, almost every time, there is someone who either saw the gunfire or like on their minimap or heard the shots, and they're already getting ready to engage you, especially while you're vulnerable and possibly reloading. So if you want to stay alive and be more consistent, you have to go into every fight assuming there's a follow-up enemy. The mindset alone changes how you play. You don't stand still in one spot and you try to avoid reloading immediately if you still have ammo left. If you have at least 13 rounds in the magazine, that's usually more than enough, especially in close quarters fights, to take one extra enemy. One of the best things they can do right after securing a kill is reposition slightly. That means like changing your angle, shifting left or right, or even changing your height before re-engaging. That's just a small adjustment, makes a massive difference. You would be surprised how much doing things like this cuts down on the trade deaths. And instead of, getting that one kill and instantly dying, you start surviving the second and even the third engagement. And that directly improves your performance and your KD, of course. Tip number three is sound. Sound and audio is actually very important, especially after the recent changes and improvements we've had with the footsteps audio in the game. Before I get into how to use audio in gameplay, you need to make sure your audio settings are set up correctly. I'm not going to go over every single settings, just the most important ones. So for master volume, I personally keep it at 70. For sound effects volume, I keep it at 100. For music volume, I keep it at 0. Everything else in this section is really up to your personal preference. For sound system configuration, I recommend using either 3D headphones, of course if you have them, or stereo. These are the top two sound system options, for the best overall sound quality in the game, and that's after testing different setups. For the audio mix, I always go with the night mode. Night mode has a narrow dynamic range, which reduces ambient noise and very loud sounds, but at the same time it amplifies lower volume sounds, and those lower volume sounds include footsteps. Night mode is easily the best option if you want to hear every single footstep around you as clearly as possible. Now, as far as using audio in actual gameplay, always make sure you're listening and not forgetting that you have sound system can give you a lot of information on what's going on around you. This is especially important in a close quarters situation and inside buildings. So if you're about to come around a corner and you hear a lot of footsteps around you, sometimes the best move is to simply pause for a second, stop, listen, and try to categorize the footsteps, where they're coming from and how many enemies might be nearby. That alone can give you a big advantage before you even engage. So for example, if you're like inside a building and you know there is an enemy above you or below you or the same floor, there is a good chance they're also listening for you. Pausing for a couple seconds can help you figure out which direction they're moving in, and that gives you the opportunity to surprise them or even flank them. Audio is much better than it used to be. It has improved significantly, even though it still needs some work, but right now it's good enough for you. You should absolutely take advantage of it and not just ignore it. Tip number 4 is learning when to bounce off. You're probably already doing this every now and then during a match. You're judging the situations around you, and sometimes you choose not to engage in a firefight because you already feel like you're probably going to lose it. But the key here is to use this concept more intentionally and more often than you currently do. For example, if there's like a sniper hard scoping your angle, or if there's like a tank right next to you and you're not engineer and you don't have the right anti-tank setup to counter it, or if there are multiple enemies holding your peak, the correct play is actually to fuck off. Don't repeat, don't ego challenge it, and don't do the maybe I can get this one kind of thing, you know what I mean? You and I were both done this plenty of times, sometimes just for fun, challenging situations that are way more overpowered that we can realistically handle, and that's fine occasionally, but don't make this a habit. In these situations, the smart move is to break line of sight, rotate, and disengage entirely. So if your goal is to improve your gameplay, the overall performance, and your KD, then you need to understand that living is actually winning in this game. The only real exception to this is when you're like on a team that is completely dead, nobody's pushing, nobody's doing anything, and you end up being the only one left to take a challenge or, you know, take an objective, try to make something happen. In those cases, sometimes you have to force a play. But in general, learning when to bounce off is huge. Knowing when not to take a fight will improve your consistency more than almost anything else. Tip number 5 is spawns. When you're trying to spawn in, make sure you actually take your time with the big map, even just for a few seconds. Learn to read it quickly and choose the right spot to spawn. There are a lot of things that you can study, you know, on the big map. You can see the overall flow of the match. You can, you know, kind of get a sense of whether your team is winning or losing. You can locate spawn beacons and squad mates to spawn on. But it's important to understand that it's not always the right decision to spawn on a beacon or squad mate. Your spawn needs to make a difference in the game. At least, you know, that's your objective for every time. For example, if both teams are heavily focused on 1 or 2 objectives in Conquest match, try spawning near a neutral or enemy objective and start taking it. Even if you're going to be solo for a short time, that alone can change the flow of the match. If there is an objective that is about to fall to the enemy and you have time to spawn there, that should always be your priority. And you don't have to engage right away if there are too many enemy players on the objective trying to take it. You can just hang around, and once they leave, you can just, you know, flank them, shoot them from behind, or simply take the objective after they're gone. Now, if you're alone on an objective and your squad is about to spawn on you, especially if they're like all dead, you need to play your life. Your job is to stay alive for 5 more seconds so your squad can spawn in and suddenly you will have numbers. That usually means backing up, holding a tight angle, and not overextending and waiting. You're not playing scared when you do this. You're setting up a swing that actually wins the fight. In general, spawning at your base is not something you should be doing every time or often if there are better options available. However, the first objective closest to your base is extremely important. So if that objective is red and not secured by your team, you should absolutely spawn at your base and go take it. That objective is crucial to control early and throughout the match. Now, a bad spawn is typically a free death. So before you spawn, always check if your teammates is under fire. Check if enemies are already nearby. Check if that spawn is facing the enemy. Sometimes waiting just 2 seconds for a safe respawn saves you 30 seconds of dying and respawning again. Also, there is one simple question you should always ask yourself before spawning. Do I have cover the second I move? If the answer is no, I would spawn there. You know, good spawns put you behind cover. Good spawns give you a wall or an object or something to anchor on so you can observe before shooting. Bad spawns throw you into the open lanes and that are already pre-aimed by enemies. Of course, there are exceptions to every rule. If your team is losing badly and you just need to push, sometimes you have to spawn in a risky area and force something to happen. That's understandable, but in general, smart spawns save lives and bad spawns get you killed for free. Tip number 6 is gameplay, and specifically pre-aiming. This is another thing that a lot of people sometimes ignore or don't consistently maintain. And honestly, even professional players or content creators sometimes miss doing this. Pre-aiming is about, aiming before something happens. It's about timing. And this is especially important when you're like playing around corners, tight hallways, or any lane where there's like an endpoint that could easily have an enemy camping it. Pre-aiming is basically when you ADS your weapon because you expect someone to come from a certain corner, angle, or doorway. You're not reacting after you see them. You're already ready when they appear. This is one of the biggest ways to give yourself an advantage in one-on-one fights. If you already aimed in and centered where the enemy is most likely to show up, you're going to win that gunfight way more often than someone who's sprinting, hip firing, or aiming late. Learning when and where to pre-aim means you're always entering engagements with an advantage instead of reacting at the last seconds. And over time, that alone makes you much more consistent and much harder to kill. Also, whenever you take a fight, you should always ask yourself simple question: how many angles can I be seen from right now? If the answer is 2 or 3, you're probably in a bad spot. In those situations, you want to position yourself near a corner in a way that completely blocks one side and leaves you exposed to only a single direction. Doing this turns what could be a messy, chaotic situation into a clean one-on-one instead of you getting deleted by someone you never even saw. This kind of positioning alone can dramatically improve your survivability because you're controlling the fight instead of letting multiple enemies have free angles on you. Another thing that I mentioned earlier, but it's important enough to repeat here, is reloading discipline. You really need to break that habit of reloading too often or reloading after firing just a few bullets. This habit becomes extremely destructive if you can't stop it. It's especially bad right after you kill an enemy because that's usually the follow-ups, players come in and get you. A lot of people get caught mid-reloading in those moments and they lose what they should be, having like a winnable one-on-one fight. If you still have ammo in the mag, stay ready, reposition if needed, and only reload when it's actually safe to do so. Tip number 7 is your soldier behavior, and there are a few things that I want to talk about here. The first one is objective sprinting. A lot of players sprint straight into an objective and die before the gun, even comes out. You know exactly what I mean. Now, this can be okay in some situations, like, in Conquest, if you have, or that for a fact that an objective have no enemies, then sprinting toward it is totally fine. But in general, the better habit to build is to sprint only to the last safe piece of cover, and then kind of slow down for the final entry so your gun will be ready and you will be ready. It might feel slower at first, but then your survival rate will go up, way up. The next behavior is team spacing, or how you're positioned relative to your squad mates when you're like attacking an objective or attacking a vehicle or pushing together. So if you and your teammates are standing on the same head glitch or holding the same line, you're basically offering the enemy a free double kill. One grenade, one spray, one explosion, one flank, and one sniper shot can wipe both of you instantly. And even outside the objectives, if your squad mates are engaging enemies, it's never a good idea to stand directly behind someone who might get sniped or is already being watched by a sniper. The last point here with this tip is avoiding jumping into clustered fights that are already being bombarded by the enemy. What I mean by that is if you see a bunch of your teammates fighting enemies and the power balance is clearly in your enemy's favor, your team is getting overwhelmed or slapped pretty hard, that's usually not the moment to jump in and become an easy kill. And instead, play it smart. Use the fact that the enemy is already busy fighting your team, rotate, flank, and hit them from a different angle. That surprise factor alone can completely flip the fight in your favor. Tip number 8 is playing the objective. I know this one sounds obvious and a lot of people would probably think this, should be tip number 1, but I delayed mentioning it because it should be obvious to most players. Still, I'm including in these 10 tips because how important it actually is. I know the goal of this video is to help you get better gameplay, better overall performance, and improve your KD as an individual player. But at the end of the day, Battlefield is a team-based game. It's about teamwork, playing your role, helping your squad, and helping your team secure a win. So play the objective and give it whatever it needs to win it. If your team is losing at any point and you're focused on sitting on one objective and trying to farm a few kills, that's usually a wrong approach. In those situations, it's better to change your strategy, give more to the team, and try to influence the match in a different way. A single good rotation, capture, defense can completely change the outcome of the game. Playing the objective doesn't just help your team win, it also creates better fights, better positioning, and more meaningful engagements, which naturally leads to better performance overall. Tip number 9 is spottings and pings. Every ping you place gives you minimap real estate. if you know what I mean. It shows enemy positions, gadgets, vehicles, danger zones, or even potential enemy flanks. All of this information helps your team and sync everyone's awareness, so people can actually act instead of just guessing. And this isn't only about team play. Even in one-to-one situation, pinging an enemy soldier can give you a small but real advantage. For a brief moment, you will be able to see that enemy on your minimap, and that extra information can help you track their movement and anticipate their next move. Spotting is also extremely important when it comes to vehicles. So if you see an enemy vehicle camping, pinging it can make a huge difference. That vehicle will light up on your teammate's minimap, especially for anyone who's closer to it. That alone can give them time to prepare a reposition and completely avoid a fight they don't even know it was coming. The final and the 10th tip is Gunplay. And there are 3 components I want to talk about here. The first one is learning which fights you should never ADS for. I'm talking about situations where hipfire is a better option, like using your laser and close range control instead of aiming down sights. In a lot of cases, hipfire is simply faster than ADS. The situations where you need to avoid ADS are tight CQB fights, like doorways, stairwells, and close corners swings. ADSing in these situations can easily get you killed by players who shoot first using the hipfire. Knowing when to stay in hipfire and trust it is a big part of winning close range fights. Now, the second component is vertical awareness. You have no idea how often players become easy prey just because they forget to look up. Windows, rooftops, staircases, second floor angles, rubble, or any kind of elevation can give the enemy a massive advantage. Anytime you're moving through the map, you should always be asking yourself, are there like rooftops around here? Are there like any windows? Is there like a higher level someone could be peeking from? If someone is above you, they already have an advantage. So to be good at this game, you need to clear vertical angles first, not the last. The third part is don't reveal yourself unless you can finish. Taking a shot at an enemy and missing is often worse than not shooting at all. The moment you fire and miss, you reveal your position, and there is a good chance you will get killed by the same enemy you failed to take down. So don't rush shots. Just don't panic fire. Only commit to a gunfight when you're like confident you can finish it. And that's going to wrap it up for today, guys. If you made it this far, I really appreciate you. These tips aren't about playing scared or changing your playstyle completely. They're about playing smarter, staying alive longer, and giving yourself advantages before the fight even starts. So if you start applying even a few of these consistently, you're going to notice a real difference in your gameplay and your KD. And if you found this video helpful, make sure you drop a like so more people can see it, and let me know in the comments which tip helped you the most, or if there is anything that you want me to break down in more details in future videos. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.
Late night glow on the monitor light, Ghost X grinding while the world sleeps tight. Controllers click like a heartbeat sound, building a kingdom where the lost get found.